Hello, this is William Brister with SkySwitch University. And in this session, we want to talk about E911 services on SkySwitch. Now, SkySwitch provides the ability for our resellers, for all of US and Canada subscribers to dial 911 and access emergency responder services. So, for callers on the SkySwitch network, dialing 911 from a successfully registered device with an emergency caller ID assigned other than 10 zeros, the caller can expect one of the following events to occur. If the emergency address information is not added to the phone number, then the telephone call will bypass the local service center, 911 service center, and it's going to go to the national service center. And in that case, they're going to try to find the address. They're going to, if they can, they're going to push the call back down to the local service center. But if they can't, they're going to make their best effort at finding out where the address of the call is. And that's why it's very important in setting up E911 that you have your emergency address information on your numbers and then assigned to your users. There's two places it has to take place in the Managed EID portal. It has to have the emergency address information assigned to the number, and then in the Managed PBX on the user, it has to have the E911 caller ID information added. So I'm going to show you how to do both of those. And telephone number submitted with an address, of course, they're going to hit a local service center. Now, we do have the option in the system to have 10 zeros on outbound 911 caller ID that will give the caller when they dial 911 a fast busy. And so I'll show you that option as well. So as we get into the DID portal, I have a number here that I'm going to use to put emergency address information on. Okay, so I have this number here in Allen, Texas. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to select the action of putting on emergency address information. So this is how you add emergency address information to a number within the DID portal. I'll put in my address here. Let me get this correct. The state. And now I'm going to validate the information. So what this is doing, it's validating the address information with the 911 system. So we will we'll get a success here momentarily. Okay, so we see address validated successfully. So now I will apply that emergency address information to that number. Okay, so we have success provisioning E911 on this number. Now the other thing I did not do, and I'll do right now, is I need to assign the number down to the domain. So hang on one second. So I've assigned the number into the domain I want it to be in, but I do want to stress again that there's two steps to setting up E911. Number one, you have to set the emergency address information here in the DID portal. And then once you have it set up, you can click on Show Services, and on that number, it's going to show you that you have your E911 emergency address information set up. You can also download the E911 report, which will then show this number and the address that you put in the system on that report. It's a spreadsheet, and it'll download for you. Okay, so now we want to go into the PBX for the second step of setting up E911 for users. We're going to go down into the domain that I assigned the number into. Okay, so I have that number in the inventory of this domain. Here it is, 5216673. I just left it available. But as I click on the users and I go to a particular user, on the profile of the user, you'll see the caller ID information here. Now, this is where you'll set the area code, the caller ID, name, outbound, and then here the caller ID information can be changed. And of course, this is the important one. We can then set the number for our 911 outbound caller ID. Okay, so once it is set here, then when this user dials 911 from a registered device on his extension, then the correct outbound emergency address information will be sent. Now, if you had 10 zeros here, which you could put in at the default domain level and have it inherited down to the user when you create a user, if you had 10 zeros here and this user tried to dial 911, they would get a fast busy. So it's a way of blocking 911 calls. Now, let me specify, and this is very important, if we add in a number here for 911 caller ID information and it does not have the emergency address information added to it in the DID portal, then that call is going to bypass the local service center. It's going to go to the national service center because it does not have an emergency address information applied, and that's going to be a $150 charge. So I just want to stress, and that's why that's one of the reasons why it's important for a reseller to understand this. The other reason is we're dealing with 911. We're dealing with customers that are going to be calling 911 when there is an emergency, and they're expecting, of course, to receive responder help. So it's very important to get this correct. Now let me say something a little more on the subject of the user E911 information. In managing and assigning E911 caller ID to any user, you must be aware of a systemic inheritance at the user level from the emergency caller ID field within the domain setting. So like here in this domain, C2C, which we were just setting the user E911 information on, if when you add a domain or if you go back to edit a domain, you have this emergency caller ID field. Now these are on your defaults tab. Now when you create a user, a domain, and then you add a user to that domain, the user inherits the defaults that are set at the domain level. Now it doesn't mean it inherits the defaults, but then you can change those defaults. If you leave this blank, there will be no inheritance at the user level. But if we were to put the 10 zeros and then create the user at the user level, then that user would inherit the 10 zeros and it would block the 911 calls. So the best practice, one of the best practices is that if you don't know what number you're going to use, you're going to create the domain, you're going to start creating users, but you don't know what number is going to be used for outbound emergency 911 caller ID, then you may put 10 zeros in here and let the users inherit the 10 zeros, but then know that you need to add in the emergency caller ID information later when you find out what number you're going to use, and those customers need that emergency address information added. So just understand this aspect here as far as domains. One other point here on the system, when you create SIP trunks on the system, the SIP trunk basically utilizes this field, this emergency caller ID, as the outbound emergency caller ID number for the SIP trunk. Of course, when you add a SIP trunk to the system, you're not adding hosted users. The SIP trunk's connecting to an IP device, an IPPBX or something like that. So you can utilize this emergency caller ID field to put in a number that has emergency address information on it and use that as the outbound emergency E911 caller ID number. Now let's talk about testing. So it gives me the opportunity to point out a document, and much of what I've told you today will be in this document. It's on our doc site, docs.skyswitch.com, and under the left page tree under Telco Services, you have 911 E911 services on SkySwitch. On this document, there is an area for testing of E911. And one of the things we've provided on the system is a test number, a 933 test route number. So by dialing 933 from a registered device or soft phone on the system, you can test the emergency address information that has been added to the number, or added to the user as the outbound 911 information. So what you're going to hear after dialing 933 is you're going to get a welcome to the 911 enabled automated test system. Your account is in live mode. You're going to get a subscriber identifier, which is the 10 digits that the caller ID field that you've submitted to the system. Your location, the location coverage will be enhanced 911, and then they're going to let you give a brief message that will then be played back to you to test the audio. Okay, so that's how the 933 test number works. And also, just understand, if you dial 911, from a registered device, and you do have the emergency address information applied, there will be a 99 cent per call charge. So all standard call charges apply, when you make a test call, and you could dial 911 to make that test call. We recommend using the 933 number. Also caution that, again, if you use the 10 zeros, it will block the emergency call and will provide a fast busy. And this is the case not only for hosted users, but also for SIP trunk users. Now, lastly, I would point out some recommended best practices. There's some other videos that will apply that you'll be able to gain information from, but we have our best practices here at the bottom of the document. Follow the instructions carefully as we have pointed them out. The case where you need to add numbers to the DID portal, as far as main numbers or numbers that will be used for E911 emergency address information. So you'll use the BYOT number adding function on the DID portal. There's another document that discusses that, BYOT, adding BYOT TNs to the system. Again, we've mentioned the SIP trunk, that is the emergency caller ID field on the domain that applies the E911 information on a SIP trunk. And lastly, assignment of a new construction or temporary address. In some cases, you'll get an error in the DID portal when adding an address, and it's because the address is a new construction or a temporary address. And in that case, just open a ticket with support, provide them this information, and our support's going to open a ticket with 911 provider and have the address information valid, manually loaded, and validated. Okay, great. This is handling E911 information. Again, here's the beginning of the document. And if you have any questions, you can, of course, open a support ticket. Thank you for your time.